I have made it clear that Facebook loves to censor conservatives and libertarians and Christians. So let's set that aside and ask a more important question. How do you stop evil on a website like Facebook? And yes, this is a serious problem, and I sympathize with Facebook in this challenge to stop evil. And the amount of evil out there is enormous. And evil loves Facebook. And make no mistake, there is evil with a capital E in every kind of group, even among those who call themselves Christian. And that evil causes huge damage. And God, in the Old Testament, had a specific prescription for what to do with evil. You take it out and kill it with stones. But the problem is that almost everyone is evil these days. In fact, you aren't a true blue God-fearing Christian with a capital C. I'm sorry, if you aren't a true blue God-fearing Christian with a capital C, you are probably pretty corrupt. Even the sincere Christians have gotten corrupt. How can you stop such evil in the midst of a sea of corruption? And the hate that flows through comment sections is enormous. And it takes a lot of effort to keep it out. And if you dare to block a comment, you'll get a wave of hate. I know I do. So yes, there's a lot of evil in Facebook. But there's also a huge amount of evil that wants to use Facebook. And we had an example of this on Friday with the Satanist that murdered 49 Muslims in New Zealand. And just for the record, I want to remind all of you that I positively love censorship. When evil shows up in the comment section of a Megashock, there is no button that I love better than the one labeled trash. I love that button and I use it often. And sometimes I get a chance to hear the screams of outrage as evil comments get deleted. Music to my ears. Oh, and when Facebook and Instagram were having problems this past week, you'll never guess what people did instead. That's right. They went to Pornhub for all the free hardcore porn that they could watch. It's just more proof that we've destroyed ourselves. But let's move beyond Facebook to the internet. The inventor of HTTP, or Hypertext Transfer Protocol, is Tim Berners-Lee. He also invented HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language. And he started developing all of that in 1989. I wanted to say 1889. That would have been good. 1989. He introduced it in 1991. And it led to what we now call the World Wide Web, or just the web. But he doesn't like what he has produced at this moment. He says that the web is dysfunctional with perverse incentives. And he doesn't understand why. Why is the web so dysfunctional? Because we are. It's simple. What was the first industry to make money on the web? Pornography. What are some of the most popular websites on the web producing? Hardcore pornography. And we can get it for free, just like the perverts did when Facebook and Instagram were having trouble. So my answer to Sir Tim, I think as he's called now, is that he needs to read the Bible. In there it will show him the problems, and the problem is sin. And the fact that we are morons, which is pretty much the same thing. Unfortunately for Tim and for many of us, the web is dying. And I saw more evidence of that fact in an article titled "The Death of the Internet" from the American Conservative. And here's the quote that tells you when it died. Quote, "If you had to choose a date for when the internet died, it would be in the year 2014. Before then, traffic to websites came from many sources, and the web was a lively ecosystem. But beginning in 2014, more than half of all traffic began coming from just two sources, Facebook and Google. Today, over 70% of traffic is dominated by those two platforms." Close quote. If you want to see the rise of the beast, look at Google and Facebook. There are others out there, but the internet has become centralized, something that it was never designed to be. Is Google the beast? I don't think so, but I see it as a kind of prototype. We'll see what happens, but this article gives you a nice snapshot of the history of the internet, and I got a chance to watch it rise myself as I was growing up in the computer industry. And I remember when upstart Google was just a better version of Alta Vista. Now there's a name. Do you remember Alta Vista? I do. But let's not stop with the internet, even though we already have enough to go on just there. Let's look at recent events that show us how awful our society has become. And this article is titled, "The College Admissions Scandal is a Perfect Example of How Deeply Corrupt America Has Become." And it gets off to an awful start. When I clicked the link, I didn't realize that this was from Michael Snyder, and Michael hammers the point home in the last lines of this piece. Quote, "I know that it is not fashionable to talk about morality and values these days, but the truth is that history has shown us that any nation that is deeply corrupt is not likely to survive for very long. Our founders understood this, and former President John Adams once stated that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. Avarice, ambition, revenge, and licentiousness would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Today we are neither moral or religious. What we are is deeply corrupt, and America will not survive if we keep going down this path." Close quote. It is one thing for me to say all this from the other side of the planet, in Taiwan, but it's quite another for someone like Michael to say it, who is in the United States. Corruption kills, and it always has, and I'm afraid that the United States, the place of my birth, has entered the last stages of terminal corruption. You might call it stage 4 corruption. And then Paul Joseph Watson enters the discussion talking about more than just the United States. His scathing rebuke is pointed at Western civilization as a whole, and his YouTube video is titled "The Collapse of Western Civilization." He starts off by saying, "Great civilizations are always the architect of their own downfall. Historian Arnold Toynbee studied 28 different great civilizations and found the same pattern. Great civilizations commit suicide." And Glyn-Jones spent 9 years studying how civilizations declined. She describes our culture as one that has, quote, "run its course, which is morally and aesthetically and spiritually bankrupt," unquote. This is the background of the constant anxiety that pervades our culture and is a sign that we know the end is nigh. More Americans than ever are dying from drug overdoses, gun violence, car crashes, and AIDS. Gun violence, car crashes, or AIDS never killed as many Americans in a single year as overdoses did in 2017. But the issue isn't just prescription drugs. In the UK, so much cocaine is flushed into the rivers, endangered eels are becoming hyperactive and not reaching sexual maturity. The number of 16 to 24-year-olds using coke, ecstasy, crystal meth, and LSD doubled in just a 2-year period from 2016 to 2018. In the U.S., heroin abuse has skyrocketed. Over the past 15 years, the number of people who used MDMA, marijuana, and other drugs also consistently climbed over the last decade. And I'm probably quoting him wrong. You'll have to listen to the video. Alcoholism is on the rise. 1 in 8 Americans is now an alcoholic. Close quote. Again, watch his video. He certainly does a better job of saying his words than I do. And that's just the first 80 seconds of his 13-minute video. The bottom line? The experiment in democracy failed for exactly the reasons that the founders of our civilization said that it would. We are on the downhill slope of the end of the Euro-American civilization, and the barbarians are patiently waiting for their opportunity to gather their own share of the spoils of conquest. After all, what did you think the coming of Gog and Magog was? And then, just to drive the point home, we have this snapshot of the fall of America and a link titled "Georgia High School Sexting Scandal." at least 50 students caught up in sexting scandal at North Georgia High School. Those 50 students represent about 6% of the school. That's a lot. Do these kids have parents? Of course they do. Want to bet that these parents are morons? And those of you who went to public school in the 70s and 80s, like me, could have predicted this. Our classmates were morons, and they've raised their own batch of morons.